gozaimasu, our Japanese greeting for any time of the day. And here's what we do here at Shakespeare Therapy as Anchor in Wisdom and Anchor in Healing. And we have just a very unusual show for you today. So crush and sniff, we're back to doing rosemary when we breathe. Because the breathing cleanses the internal organs, clears the brain, and the crushing and sniffing of the herbs and the essential oils just ramps that up. There are scientific studies that I have found now, especially rosemary and mint. And we've been doing mint because we want a more gentle ease into the year, although it hasn't really been, but the mint helps. And I have it by my kitchen sink, and it's such a great little pop refresher in the morning when you're getting up, even better than coffee, which I don't have. But I was going to have my chlorophyll this morning that we talked about in the parsley show, because I've had about 4 hours sleep every night this week as I'm trying to finish this paper. And so that got me thinking about, first of all, a big hat tip and bow to Christopher Plummer, who died this week. He was a fantastic Shakespearean actor and an actor in general, and lover of Shakespeare. So, but of course he's most well known probably for Captain Von Trapp in The Sound of Music. But I've seen him do some fantastic Shakespeare. And been listening to a lot of podcasts and stuff, and I was thinking about this paper and why I got into primary research. And primary research is when you go to original documents, when it's not just reading somebody else's opinion of what happened. And I always saw myself as a bridge between, the heavily academic stuff, and because I was first trained as an actor, to make it more easily and accessible. And one of a great teacher I had us always look at all the glossaries for what a line might mean or insight into it, which I highly recommend if you're of that stripe. But I found that a lot of things didn't have glossaries or weren't glossed. For instance, Good My Mouse of Virtue and Twelfth Night. Went through 7 different editions trying to find a gloss on that. And then when I found it, it wasn't right. So anyway, that's how I became a primary researcher. And I've been thinking about if you just like something and you don't want to be an expert, because we can't be an expert in everything, how do you trust the person that you're listening to and figure out that they're not just parroting information that's probably old or not correct, or, an amalgam of those things. And I haven't figured that out yet. Sometimes it's a gut feeling. The other thing I say to students when that used to happen is, to be an expert in one thing. And it turns out Horace Walpole said it long before I did, much better than I do. But if you're an expert in one thing, it gives you like a homing device or an ability to see through when somebody doesn't really know what they're talking about, I think. So keep that in mind. I think discernment is one of the top 5 traits that we always have to keep close in our quiver. And but anyway, so because I'm not an expert on every single plant, because I was writing about the plants in Shakespeare, and I should have gone out, but because I was writing this paper, I didn't have time to go out and get roses. And our show today is thorns. It's on thorns. And who would have thought that I would have found somebody who's an expert on thorns, who can talk about thorns? But the roses I have, they've been cut off. And that's an interesting thing. It's like that we want to take off the bad, the line of the week. I'm not sure, I was thinking about, if you're working on discernment, there's a great one from the nurse where she says, be wary, look about. And I think that doesn't always mean be afraid. Just keep your eyes open. Be aware of what's going on around you. Discernment. Be wary, look about. And then the sonnet is, roses have thorns and silver fountains mud. Meaning, Shakespeare very aware of the yin and the yang of everything. So roses are beautiful. Look how beautiful these roses dried that I'd gotten a couple weeks ago. I mean, There's just incredible beauty in every stage of life, but they've taken off the thorns. And the thorns, it turns out, are not just the bad part and the not useful part. They are, well, we'll find out from our expert, who is Debra DeAngelo, and she has a book out called The Elements of Horse Spirit and the Magical Bond Between Humans and Horses. And of course, there are a lot of horses in Shakespeare. And Philip Sidney wrote this big long thing about horsemanship before his tract called A Defensive Posy or an Apology for Poetry, where he actually wishes himself a horse. And she says the book is about incredible ways in which horses heal, ground, and teach you to be better in everything that you do. I love them. I haven't been able to ride for a while, but I also feel that way about Shakespeare. It heals you and it grounds you and it teaches you to be better in everything that you do. And so now we're going to hear about thorns in that. And because I don't have a rose, I realized, oh my God, I have 7 roses. There are actually 8 roses in the book, and Sumie made sure they all have their thorns, but we did do a thorn page. And the reason I did that is because there's so many quotes about thorns, like the sonnet one I just told you. But I kind of pulled a composite together of the rose hips on the thorns from a thistle, and bramble, which is blackberry, which if you get caught in a bramble, he talks about bramble a lot, and thorns. So we put all those quotes in there because there's so much metaphor in there. And one of the other ones I love is show me the steep and thorny path to heaven. That's Ophelia. And the first part of that line is, do not as some ungracious pastors do, show me the steep and thorny path to heaven. Anyway, so plenty of roses always blooming in the book. And now we're going to bring on Debra DeAngelo, if I could. There she is. It seems weird to say welcome right now because for you, we're in the middle of the show, but we had such technical difficulties that we decided to switch to Zoom and bring Debra DeAngelo on here to maybe have a clearer understanding of thorns. So, and I just noticed Debra is the author, as I said, of The Elements of Horse Spirit, the Magical Bond Between Humans and Horses. We have you here today because you told me that you knew about thorns.
Right. So the thorn, when as you said, when we get a rose in a flower shop, they have stripped the thorns away. But I have here this little rose, and you can see it's got some pretty impressive thorns for a little miniature rose.
Beautiful rose too.
Yeah. And then from a larger plant, I love when I can go in my yard and get visual aids. But you can see here that
Ooh,
these are some serious spikes. They'll do some damage.
they look scary. Is that a rose stem as well?
That is a rose stem.
Okay.
And then what I have here came off of my mandarin tree, and this is called a sucker. And these types of thorn branches don't produce any fruit. And their only purpose is to protect the plant from predators, which in a plant's case would be anything that's an herbivore, like a deer, things that strip. And this is just a little baby sucker. When you get them full grown, they can be 20 feet tall with spears this long, and they'll go right through your hand. They're very, very sturdy. So, and there's so many more things with thorns than we think about besides the rose. So it being a Shakespeare themed program, the other classic thorned bush is the hawthorn. That's an English plant. Mm-hmm. And it can be used in magic, which is the perspective I'm taking, the same way as a rose thorn might. There was magic going on in his time, Usually what was being called witches were herbalists. That was their specialty. Healing magic and potions, often done with a variety of herbs. So certainly it was happening in Shakespeare's time, but just probably not front and center, because people were still getting burned at the stake and things like that. And It was an occupation frowned upon. So yes, from a magical angle, there's a couple other things that come to mind that are classic thorn images. One is from Sleeping Beauty. When Sleeping Beauty pricks her finger on the needle to prevent Prince Charming from getting to her, Maleficent grows a thicket of thorns around the castle, and he has to slash his way through. So again, there's that idea of protecting something precious and keeping others away. So with things that are thorned, they make barriers around a house, around a person. So in the past, when I had children's bedrooms that faced the street, I planted big tea rose, which gets tall and has impressive thick stalks. The tea rose is usually what you get when you get a bouquet. And year round, even when there's no flower on the plant, that's a thick barrier of spikes, and it's wide, and so it keeps people away from a window.
Putting roses around anything as not a layer of beauty and a layer of protection is a gorgeous idea.
It's like life, like you said, there's a yin and yang. So you could plant them immediately around a window, or if you wanted a more magical perspective, you could plant a border, and there are a lot of roses that grow in border shape. But magically speaking, you could plant the entire perimeter of your house if you wanted to. And so when you're planting magically, you don't just plunk the thing in the ground. You set an intention, which is the first step in magic, is setting a clear, positive goal. Like, my goal is to protect those I love. My goal is to protect my home. So you can just speak this into the plant, be thinking of that in your mind as you plant, and infuse it with that energy to protect your home. And we also talked about Valentine's Day.
Right.
Valentine's Day. Valentine's Day can be a wonderful day for a lot of people. And for some people, it's not such a wonderful day. You may have lost your spouse, the relationship may have ended, or you may just be alone, and it can be a really tough day. And so something with a thorn, you think of the rose with its ladder of thorns and the beautiful rose at the top, it's protective. And so when you need to protect your own heart, you might create an altar, and on that protective altar, you could have just some thorns, you could have a branch, you could have a little miniature rose bush, or thorns that come from anything, and you'd set them with that, I need to take care of my own heart. And you might include rose quartz, and it's no mistake, it's named after the rose, because love cuts both ways, and so you would put rose quartz and maybe something symbolically protective, like a mother bear or a lion.
You said something beautiful about the rose quartz when we did take one of this too, that it wasn't necessarily for love, it was something else.
It's a particular aspect of love. It's not romantic love. The rose quartz is the heart chakra. It is gentle, tender, protective, motherly love. And sometimes, mothers put love out to others, but sometimes we need to be our own mother and say, no, I'm going to protect and care for myself, because if I wait around for someone else to do it, it may not happen. I'm going to do it for myself.
I often, I have a little skit that I do with Romeo and Juliet where I say, sometimes a girl has to be her own Romeo. So I think it's the same concept, is finding that love and protection. So the rose is love and protection. That's so Absolutely. Great, because we only often think about things with one thing. And one of the reasons that I was so adamant about, bringing plant aspect, the natural aspect of Shakespeare, is because people think of it as this very heady thing. They think of it as very highbrow, which it wasn't, and at the time, and bringing in the natural world, and as he does so much in there, to have this holistic experience of everything, whether it's Shakespeare, whether it's magic, whether it's gardening, all of that kind of thing. You mentioned brambles before too. That's
Right.
another big Shakespeare.
Yeah, let's go. We'll talk about a few of these things because there's so many more thorns than we think about. Rose and hawthorn get most of the poetic attention, and as you said, bougainvillea. Bougainvillea has thorns and spikes and climbs up the side of a house. And vines are also a protective energy. They wrap around and hug. The bougainvillea climbs, but it also digs its spikes in to go and to get up the sides. And another familiar thorned lore, of course, is the crown of thorns that Jesus wore.
Right.
And that's an actual plant. It's got nasty spikes. And the sap of the plant is additionally poisonous. Ooh. So it's not only sharp, but it's poisonous. So these things do exist. So there's also pyracantha and holly, which are spiked.
Holly's in Shakespeare.
Working with thorns as a magical aspect, I wanted to bring up a very well-known pagan writer, Raven Grimassi, who unfortunately passed away not so long ago. But he has an entire book. I know the letters will be backwards here, but it's called The Grimoire of the Thorn-Blooded Witch.
Actually, they're not backwards, but okay.
Oh, yay. On my screen they are.
Yeah.
So a grimoire is just a magical collection of spells and experiences. It's called a Book of Shadows in some tradition, but it's where you say, on this day I did this protection spell, and here's what I did, and this is what I included, because most of us think, oh, we'll remember, but we won't. A year later, I'll go, what did I do? What did I do? I go back to my grimoire, my collection of magical knowledge, or my Book of Shadows, and say, okay, I can recreate that spell. But what's interesting about this is he specifically is talking about roses, but he's talking about the thorns in particular, because in this tradition, he built an entire tradition, and it's called, let me just get to the right page here, the Rose and Thorn Path.
Ooh, what is that?
Well, this is Raven's tradition that he created, and it's all about bonding with the plants. And the thorn-blooded rose is in exchange for this plant's knowledge, he pricks his finger and puts a drop of blood at the root to develop a physical bond with this rose in his garden. And I wanted to just read this one part for you, because I think it really clarifies the importance of the thorn rather than just the flower. So it says, in old world witchery, thorns represent protection and boundary, as well as initiation and enlightenment. They are the challenges that lead to attainment, and thorns are also symbols of acknowledgement for earned achievements. In the Rose and Thorn Path, long-stemmed rose represents a ladder, the row of thorns, leading to enlightenment and attainment, the blossom. Other types of thorns appear as well in this symbolism of this system. And he mentions blackthorn and hawthorn, because those are classic old world thorny plants.
Yeah.
So this tradition that Raven created is all about sensitivity to the plant. So it's creates an understanding that plants have a consciousness that humans don't detect and just kind of skate right over, but they have a consciousness. In my second book, I talk about the mycelium, through which plants connect through laces of mycelium fungus and actually talk to each other.
Yeah, that's been amazing research that people have been doing. It's so exciting.
It's really exciting.
And what is the name of your next book? Do you have a title for it?
It's called, we just changed the name, so I want to make sure, I'm going to do my best to get it right. It's called Pagan Curious.
Oh, right. Okay.
It's called A Beginner's Guide to Magic, Nature, and the Pagan Arts.
Okay.
I think I got that right. It'll be out next fall. And so it has a whole chapter on plants, plant spirits, and also connecting with nature. And,
Oh,
and
nice.
understanding that plants and trees and flowers do have their own consciousness.
Yeah.
So what's not in there though, and what will be, because I'm on the last edit, is thorns.
Okay.
I'm going to include thorns.
Well, so who knew that I would run across an expert on thorns? I just think it's so, it was one of the reasons why I wanted to zero in on the book. People often say to me, why don't you have straw and hay? But it's not, those are derivatives of, wheat and other grains, whereas the thorns are very much, even though they're attached to the rose or they're attached to the bramble, the hawthorn, as you say, they are their own entity as well. And they have a lot of their own
Yes.
qualities. So anyway, so that, I guess, the prickly side, how can we distill this? The prickly aspects of life are for our protection and our knowledge as much as the beautiful.
It's true. I mean, life is this way. Life is a rose if you think about it. Life is, I will delight you with the rose, but if you're not careful, I'll also cut you.
Yes. And so that brings us back to what I thought should be the line of the week, which is be wary, look about. But you could also, we had this one before, roses have thorns and silver fountains mud. So
yes.
Debra, thank you so much for the first time and the second time redoing this so we can see your lovely face and see what you had to show us. That's so beautiful and brilliant. So thank you so much for taking the time to do that. And everybody have a great, great week. And we will see you on Valentine's Day with aphrodisiacs. Woohoo!